Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Monte Talks. And today we have a very special guest, and we will be talking a lot about a topic that is really, really close to my heart because we will be talking about open source. For your guests, today we have only me. Shimon wasn't able to join, but for the next one, he will be here for sure. So, my name is Jakub. I'm a senior full stack developer and advocate at Monterail. And with me today, we have Alex. So, Alex, if you could introduce yourself to our guests, to everyone who still doesn't know you,
Of
that
course,
would
yeah.
be
First of
great.
all, thanks for having me. I'm Alex Lichter, dev at Void Zero, part of the Nuxt core team. I'm doing a little bit of YouTube tutorials here and there. You might have seen my face at, these videos, conferences online, and GitHub issues also very important. That is very likely, or in social media, answering your questions all about, Nuxt and Void Zero for almost a year now. It's been a bit.
I think it's very difficult to be a Vue.js developer and haven't been able to see you at some point, like in a conference, in a talk, in a video, or in a GitHub issue where you responded. I
Well,
think
it's a good
even at
thing,
some
right?
point, yeah, of course, we had this competition, like very short competition, because I was it was very quick for me to lose this competition between you and me in terms of open discussions in Nuxt.
Right,
At
true.
certain point I tried to be as fast and as helpful as possible as Alex, but it's just not possible.
The good thing is everybody won because we all help people, and that meant more discussions being resolved. So I think we all are winners in that sense.
Sounds very good. Sounds very good. Yeah, so Alex, if you could tell me a bit about your background, but specifically with Vite, because that wasn't your first pick, right? You were part of the Next first, like the Next maintainer when there wasn't even a man or a term such as Next ecosystem or Next core team. You are the special guy who was named Next maintainer. So Vite wasn't the first pick for you. It was
Yeah,
Next. So what happened?
that's true. So, well, actually, I started all back in the PHP world, then made a quick stint over to Java, coming back to PHP for good reasons, and get very into Laravel. And from there, discovered Vue, and then discovered that Vue and SEO were a bit tricky back in the days. So server-side rendering was necessary. So I found Nuxt.js. That was all, of course, way before Vite. I used Nuxt a lot. I contributed at some point. That was like I think around when like Tailwind came out, like fixing some docs, some examples, and it was a lot of fun. So I did more. I released some modules because I needed them for my project, and there were no such modules. So I was like, why not open sourcing it if I build it anyway? And at some point in 2018, Sebastian was saying, "Oh, there's a conference in London." Back then, Vue.js London, good old times. I was like, "Yeah, I want to come around." So back then I was in Dublin for an internship, so I just took a plane and over, and that was when I joined the core team back then as like the fifth person besides Puya Clark, who's not very active anymore, but of course then the two Chopin brothers who created Nuxt. So that was the start of that, and from there, well, a lot of things happened. Also with some on and off. I think like around like 2021, around COVID, I didn't do that much open source, but focused also more on work and consultancy, which I built up in the meantime. Um, and of course, like when Vite came out, the first thing, like the touching point was like, okay, Vite works with all the frameworks, right? As it was originally planned as like a better Vue dev server. It also worked well with Vue. Nuxt at some point had a Vite module, and I enjoy using it a lot. I tried it out a lot, and well, nowadays we can say Vite is kind of like the shared infrastructure of the web. Like every like big framework, every framework, not every meta framework though, but every framework besides Next.js runs on Vite or has a Vite plugin, which is pretty amazing. And what happened eventually is that Evan reached out to me, and when first of all, he announced this company, right? Void Zero back in time, and I was like, I reached out to him, said like, hey, let's have a podcast episode about it on the Deja Vu podcast. And then a couple months later, so almost a year ago, I just came home from gym and saw a message and it's like, hey, yeah, you still do consultancy? Let's talk. And then we talked, and he asked if I want to join Void Zero's dev role, and I was like, let's do that. So here I am. That's
That's
the rough story TLDR.
that's the amazing part of I would say a personal brand, because you have created one. I have very similar story with Montreal, where I work right now. That if you do a lot of those things, such as you're active in communities, you contribute to open source, you speak at conferences, you have your own YouTube channel or maybe a blog, people notice you. Maybe not everyone, maybe not every company out there, but I think those guys who matter really, like the community, the creators, the maintainers, they will notice it, because this thing is something that differentiates you, right? Because you put more into appearing somewhere, helping someone, just being part of the community, not like giving back to the community, not just taking everything from it.
That's right. That's right. I think also it's so underrated to just share what you do, and that can be like a blog post. That can, you don't have to like make videos necessarily, right? Right. It can even be, hey, I raise an issue, or like I answer, right? Just share what I discovered. Yeah, being active in the community and sharing what you're doing will help a lot. And I know a lot of people who actually got jobs through that, besides us as well. People are also like, okay, we're not necessarily active in open source, but it's like, hey, I found a way to use, I don't know, technology X with framework Y. Here is how we did it. And then someone got hired because of a blog post like that. So there are all these stories, and that really should motivate people to like put themselves out there and share their successes, their learnings, their stories. No matter if in a blog post, at a meetup, they always look for speakers, so definitely go to a meetup, they're cool. Or at a conference, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because you talk about meetups. I am the organizer of the Vue meetup in Monterail, which happened 2 times last year. Probably will have 2 editions this year as well, and I can totally confirm that, especially that it doesn't mean that you have to be like a super expert. It doesn't mean that you have to have like 20 years of experience. We even had one speaker who wasn't proficient with Vue at all.
Nice. That's great.
And it was amazing to hear his perspective, because he was giving a talk about how he teaches AI as a React developer, how he teaches AI to teach him Vue. We have also the recording of his talk in our channel. I will link it in the description of this video as well. Because it's amazing to see different perspective on the same topic, like building websites, but from a perspective of completely different user who's building on a daily basis with a different framework.
Absolutely.
But
I fully agree there. Like I mean, I use Vue now still daily, right? That's the good part. But I also really cherish the opinions of other people using other frameworks and how they solve problems, or how they figured out things, and then see how this might be applicable in the Vue ecosystem, or which problems we maybe have solved and can contribute back. In a way, this also reflects how the story of things in the Vue ecosystem went eventually, right? Think of Vite, that was the Vue dev server in the beginning, and Evan would have said like, "Hey, we can do it for all frameworks." We wouldn't be where we are right now, and we might still stick around with like Webpack. No offense or no shame, but of course it's a different level of speed and performance in the X. So in that sense, and the same happens with like Nitro and Puya out there, with a lot of different tools, right? So it's glad. I'm very glad to see that people do that.
agree, completely agree. Speaking about coming from frameworks to actual like build tools, because we were talking about React, Vue, there are obviously other frameworks such as Angular or Svelte or others, but you right now transitioned from the actual framework more to those tools. So could you tell us a bit more about what, for example, other challenges you have there while working as a DevRel or open source engineer with tools rather than frameworks? Because I suppose there can be some differences there.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I think so. The good part is I still use Nuxt quite a lot, of course. I'm still also like contributing. It's not like I'm gone in that sense. And I still, for example, do videos on my YouTube channel. Now after the Christmas break, I'll pick up the pace again. And it's, in a way, it's really helpful to work on tools that are for like the JavaScript ecosystem, because you get out of your bubble in a certain way. I still remember when I said like, okay, I exclusively used Vue. I of course used a bit of React and Angular here and there to play around with it, but not like seriously. And then you see like bigger code bases adopting tools, and you look into them and feel like, okay, this is how they structure things, or this is how it works in like this Svelte land, or this is why they need support for certain other parts. So I think you learn a lot. That's also why I value a lot going to like general JavaScript conferences. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Vue conferences and Vue meetups. They're amazing. But you also learn so much more, especially when you work on these tools, or even when you work on a framework or library, how other people solve it. And I think this exchange is very, very important.
Yeah, sounds amazing. Uh, by the way, do you know already for this year where people could see you, for example, in a conference? Do you have any like scheduled conferences yet, or?
So there are a few things confirmed, a few things I can't spoil yet because I want to wait for the official announcement. But so definitely across Europe, also overseas. So Asia will also be at least one stint. Maybe in the US, that's not entirely sure. I got quite a few rejections already, which is more than fine because I also like there are so many amazing speakers, and I don't want to go to every conference as well. Of course, I try to do a bit less than last year. Last year was a lot, but I'm more than sure because it's right in like in front of my house, more or less. Not exactly, but at least in my city. I'll go to Vue.js Amsterdam, of course. I'll be around there. That's a given. And well, other than that, I'll keep you posted on social media.
Sounds great. Sounds great. So speaking about Vite, maybe we can now move to the topic that it's quite interesting and it was quite a discovery last year, which is Vite Plus, because a lot of people were discussing what it is exactly. There was even, I think, a thread in Reddit the guy was asking, what the heck is Vite Plus? So maybe as a DevRel at Void Zero, you will be able to share with us more about what it is, what we can expect from it, for who this project is specifically, and basically anything you can share.
Anything I can share. Okay, let's start with that. So right now, our JavaScript tooling landscape is very like scattered. We have 3 gazillion tools for everything, and actually, someone was mentioning that on like Twitter the other day. So like, actually, what we want is less tooling. We don't want to have yet another config, yet another thing to change, and oh, now I have to make sure that this actually works with my all other tools. Oh, if it doesn't, what do I have to do? Ideally, we like other languages have that kind of solved. Rust is always a good example where you have cargo, and cargo can do everything from like running the dev build, testing, docs, running the actual build, and so on, linting, formatting, you name it. And in the end, this is our goal at Void Zero, to build this like unified toolchain. That's how we call it. And to give the same experience. So have a single config, then in there configure your testing, linting, formatting, your build tool, your dev server, and all of that in one single tool. Now, of course, that also gives a lot of opportunities, and there is still a lot of like vague parts. But this unified toolchain idea is not like crazy new. I mean, once again, other languages did that before. A lot of sane languages did that, and there were other projects trying the same, like Rome. Unfortunately, failed. But I think with Void Zero, there's the best chance to make this thing a reality, and also to maybe reduce the laughter about JavaScript, like, oh, that's not a real language. You can't even just run a test command, something like that. Like this to not be a joke in that sense, but also to make JavaScript developers more productive than ever before. Because if things just work, you don't have to worry about like, oh, okay, what other tool do I need here? No, you can just use it. And the best part is if you have a bigger organization, this is also the same across your teams. So it's not like, oh yeah, here, for example, we still on Jest, and here we maybe use the Node native test runner, and here we use Buntest, and here we use Vitest. No, just one single thing for everyone. Of course, you can configure it slightly different if you want to have other rules, but the commands stay the same. You have this like, I feel like if you use a framework in different teams, and it's not necessarily just plain React, but like something that's more, let's say, structured and uniform, you have this feeling of like coming home. Like for example, for Nuxt, like if I get a Nuxt project, I know where my things are. And the same will be with a unified toolchain. And V Plus will basically allow all of that. Now, the important part is that the single parts of Vite Plus, so the commands like Vite test, Vite lint, Vite format, so Vite fmt, Vite build, they're all open source tools. So we have OXC, namely auxlint and auxformat, right, as linter and formatter. They are separately available in open source under MIT. Same for Vite, Vitest, and so on. So the idea is that Vite Plus is this umbrella CLI on top of it that combines all these tools, has this like single configuration, and very important, also can make use that it knows all of these tools together. Because someone also was like, yeah, why can't we just stuff that all into Vite? But Vite is not that. Vite is not this umbrella unified toolchain CLI. Vite is just, and big quotation mark, just the build tool, right? Now giving that all into Vite, that doesn't really feel right. It doesn't really feel this is all Vite's responsibility, and that's why Vite Plus is there.
That's a great answer. But I have one more question related to that, because I've seen some comments. I don't know if it was on X or LinkedIn or somewhere else, because there is this ongoing meme in JavaScript ecosystem that every day is a new JavaScript framework or new JavaScript tool. So I wonder, so the biggest like promise of Vite Plus is that it's not like one new part. It's more like you will replace everything with the stack. So the Void Zero stack, which is Vite Plus, for example, is the linting, the formatting, the build, the test. So everything, not that it's just another, let's say, JavaScript framework, right? Did I understand it correctly?
That's correct. Yeah, the idea is that you can use the framework you want. It doesn't matter if it's Vue or React or Svelte or Angular. Angular has partial Vite support, but it's a different story. The main part is if your framework does support Vite, you're good to go. That's the big idea, and you can leverage all the benefits there. And also, it shouldn't keep you from using your own tooling. If you say for whatever reason, hey, look, we need a different tool in the mix together, well, then you can add it. Or say like, oh, I have to use ESLint because of some really weird customer requirement. Who knows? Then you can still do that. You're not forced to use the tooling from Vite Plus, but of course, it's there to provide a default to make things easier. So every deviation from that is at your own risk. But right now, everything is at your own risk, so you still win in that sense. And also to add on that, there is also more, because Vite Plus, given that it's aware of all the tools and also of your project structure, will add some additional features like better monorepo support and also a task runner and caching. So you don't have to worry about like, oh, okay, I run the build task. Oh, nothing changed. Okay, here we go. It's just there. Same for everything that's outside of the Vite Plus stack itself. So the task runner will also cache commands that are not part of our tooling, let's say.
I see. And in terms of that, I see some similarity with one more let's say, organization or team that I know of, which is the UnJS, run by Puya, because you also mentioned the Nitro, and possibly hundreds of other packages that Puya maintains, such as H3 or City, or everything else that is also part of Nuxt. So do you have in mind some kind of, like, let's say, cooperation between those two entities? Because UnJS is also in some way trying to unify JavaScript ecosystem, but from the, let's say, the backend side. So do you see some opportunities here to join forces, or is it like completely separate?
I would treat them as two separate things, but that doesn't mean we don't collaborate. So for example, Nitro is a Vite plugin now, right? Like Nitro V3 Alpha or a beta is I think out now already. Can be run as just a Vite plugin. So we also see that things are getting closer to this like standardization, and also in big quotation marks, but more like aligning on that Vite is this shared infrastructure of the web, and that like there are a couple of options where UnJS is very helpful. For example, with Nitro and E3 to make it easy to have server-side rendering with Vite, and not like the low-level part, but just like, hey, I need some API routes, or I did it for like an internal thing. I just want to have some basic off. Yeah, I slap Nitro on it. I set it up, and we're good to go. So that is, I think, a part where Nitro and UnJS really shine. Of course, if you decide like, okay, I want to use API routes or have a framework on top of Nitro, then you can also, of course, run it in Vite with that. And in that sense, you have unification that you say this is runtime agnostic and this is platform agnostic, while Vite Plus is also runtime agnostic. So there is some similarities, and it also doesn't force you to use a certain platform, because for deployment, that's right now still up to you. But who knows if that will be different in the future in terms of like a deploy command or something. But this is like personal ideas. It's not nothing set in stone.
I see. Nothing sure yet.
No, that's the thing is also that's also important to mention. It's a good call. So given that there is no like public availability of Vite Plus, where right now we're in contact with a lot of people who signed up. You can still sign up on the viteplus.dev to get on the waitlist and to get in contact. And we like step by step open up the circles, let's say, to get people to test it. We want to make sure we dogfood it ourselves. That's also happening right now with a lot of our projects. Which means we discover pain points that we as developers have, and the same also that maybe AI agents have. So we also want to make sure that Vite Plus is AI ready, so to say. We're not like an AI company magically, right? But still in the in the current times, we have to make sure that agents work well with these tools too. And even if that's like, okay, you use V Plus, and you make sure that there are, I don't know, an agents MD already pre-filled with all the important information, how to set up things and use things, so it will just work.
Okay, and in terms of, let's say, comparing the whole Vite Plus initiative to just Vite, because Vite is like fully open source, anyone can contribute, anyone can use it. Vite Plus is probably aimed more for the enterprise, right? Because the unified tooling. Does it mean that I cannot use it as a regular developer? What are the, let's say, restrictions? Is it possible to contribute to Vite Plus when it will be live? If you could share a light on this as well.
Yeah, so Vite Plus itself is not MIT licensed, which means it will. So we plan to make it source available. So the source code is out there, but it doesn't mean you can just you reuse it like you can use it like you can use Vite. The idea behind that is, of course, it's a commercial product eventually. Regarding the pricing and how to commercialize it, there are still a lot of ideas in the room. So there's also nothing set on stone. There are a couple of options, but the main point is that Vite Plus shouldn't be an enterprise-only product in that sense, because how shitty would be a unified toolchain to say like, hey, only the enterprise people can use it. That's not the idea. In the first draft, the idea was like, okay, look, there's a generous free tier. Individuals and smaller companies and OSS and charity can just use it for free, and we're good to go. As I said, there are also other options that we're exploring, so we'll have to wait to like be closer to the first or the next announcement or first releases to see what's on there more. But what we definitely want to do is we want to make sure that we do not gatekeep. We want to make sure that people can adopt this tool chain, can use it, be productive. But on the other hand, we also want to make the tool chain itself sustainable, because right now everybody in open source is suffering from that. We've heard about Tailwind had to let go 75% of their engineering, for example. We've seen it with a lot of other projects as well, that the funding is simply not enough. So there has to be some kind of commercialization, and we also want to make sure that you can still have the full power of the open source tools. It's not like we want to, I don't know, now start moving features from Vite over to Vite Plus. We don't start like gutting the tools. Actually, that wouldn't work, because Vite Plus uses these open source tools, and if they wouldn't work well, if they wouldn't be adopted well, Vite Plus wouldn't work. So it is in our interest to keep open source sustainable, so we can also continue developing these tools and the tool chain and making sure that it's also widely adopted. These are not always fully in line, and it can be delicate balance, but also there, I think overall, like Evan with Vite and Vue had like proven track records that he can create very decent open source projects and has the open source community in mind there.
I remember one discussion, I think it was in Bonn. Was it last year or the year before, when we were there for the Vue.js DE conference? Both me and Alex were giving talks, and we also participated in the discussion. I think the topic was about open source maintenance or
Yes.
maintaining open source. I think this was the general idea behind the discussion. And there was one question from the audience: how do I make it profitable by building open source? And I remember that all of us who had some experience in open source, we all agreed that it's not an easy task.
No.
It's
Especially
a very difficult thing.
For frameworks, it might be a tiny bit easier because they are like public facing, or like for like bigger libraries. But even there, we see Tailwind CSS struggling. It's the most famous CSS framework right now, right? So even if it's popular and user facing, it doesn't mean you just like make money. So if you want to make money, open source is definitely not the right type of the industry. You might want to go into like finance or like cybersecurity or so. But that's also not the main point, right? Like the goal is not to like milk the cash cow. The goal is to create a sustainable open source or sustainable toolchain for JavaScript ecosystem based on open source tools.
Yeah, I agree. I think the best way to do open source, is to just do it when you have free time and you do it just for fun. Because if it becomes your way of living, like how you earn money for living, you start to rethink how you need to build it, how you need to develop and evolve it, the project. Because you start not thinking about how I can make the best software for the users to use and how I can make the community grow, I can help them develop using the tool. It's more like how I can make money out of it, just so that I can survive until the next month. So if we are doing it for, let's say, in our free time, we focus on community, right? We focus on the users, on the people who we are building this project with. And if we cannot afford that, we are focusing too much on enterprise while making it open source, possibly won't work. That's my guess.
Yeah, I think I try to be a bit nuanced here because it's difficult depending on what projects you work on, and also if you are the, let's say, the sole maintainer of a project, or if you have a bigger team, if, for example, that team is funding. So if I take a look, for example, at the people on like working at Void Zero, most of them, they work on open source projects like OXC, like roll down every day. Like they have their commit graph is just like all green. And they get paid for that. So in that sense, they make a living from open source. But of course, like the idea there is that this is the part of a bigger thing of, for example, V Plus. But still, you have the like benefit that people can use these tools out of the box if they want to, right? V Plus gives a lot of convenience and a lot of benefits, but as usual, you can also DIY it, which is amazing. I think, yeah, if you're like an open source developer and if you're not like on the payroll of a bigger company, then like doing it for a living always means sacrificing some parts. You can build like a freemium project. And for example, the folks from Directors did it, right? They did like a freemium project, realized, oh, we just cannibalize ourselves, and somebody comes along and builds the premium thing we built ourselves, like themselves, and then that's that. So they changed license. They said, okay, we're not open source anymore. Now we're source available. And the things will become open source at some point after the age of code reached like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, or 5 years. It's a very common thing in the BSL and the business source license. And that helped a lot to say, oh, if you have an annual recurring revenue bigger than, I don't know, 1 million, 10 million, some figure, you need a commercial license. So you can commercialize in certain ways. Other ways are, of course, hey, I offer, I don't know, courses, I do like paid tutorials, etc., etc. Though I guess that will also decline now in the age of AI. That might be a bit trickier. Everybody's talking about, oh, we don't want to do hour-long tutorials anymore because nobody's watching them. Everybody's just like prompting and generating their content. So I'm curious how that will shift. But yeah, in the end, open source sustainability is really, really difficult. And the chances that you can live for it just through sponsorships and be fully independent in that sense are super slim. Once again, Evan is the one who was able to do that. But this is, in a way, like a big outlier for a lot of projects where this just didn't work.
Yeah, and just looking at Evan, Evan is Evan, right? No, not everyone is the same. So looking at him and thinking I will do the same, risky business.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's also not like he started like fully independent, right? This Vue was also a side project in the beginning. But on the other hand, I must say that if you are an open source and you contribute, then you also, of course, have a great chance to get hired at amazing companies. I think this is the circle to what we discussed before, that like, okay, for example, once again, at Void Zero, they're like people who joined were eventually there because of their contributions to the open source ecosystem. You don't need to like have a crazy take it home task. You can just take a look at their GitHub profile and see what they're doing. And then it's more about the cultural fit and how you would fit in a team than your coding abilities, because this is how you were able to show them. And I think same applies to a lot of other scenarios where like, okay, here's your GitHub link. Oh, I maintain an open source project. Doesn't have to be like huge, but just showing that you can pull it off is already pretty amazing. So that's a big plus.
Vite plus.
Vite plus, there we go.
About Vite, do you see a place or a room where Vite can still grow? Because it is growing like every month, every year. There are some improvements to Vite to make it faster, more secure, more stable, more, let's say, have more unified tooling. But do you see some areas today where Vite is not there yet, but could be or should be soon?
Yeah, I think there are always like ways of improving. I think one part, like the right now, the environment API, the Vite environment API is out there for a while, and that already gives a good step in the right direction to handle certain parts. Like now we only have like client and server. We might have multiple different environments at once, or we deploy to platforms like Cloudflare Workers and so on. So to cover that in the tool is already very helpful. And then there are a lot of things that like framework authors like would like to have easier, or like what would just have like an easier life when it would exist. For example, an asset API to have an easier time to extract SSR, CSS styles, to have module types and Vite, which they will come. For most of these things, you actually need to have like roll down first as the underlying tool, and that will come in Vite 8, which will hopefully release soon. But it's in beta right now, so you should try it because it's super fast and quite stable actually. So I think there's quite some room to grow. It just takes a while. First of all, Vite is used by so many people out there. When we had the Void Zero redesign, I did this like little bento graphics where it showed like some images, and I have to double check. I think like more like 4.1 or so, more than 4.1 billion downloads of all the packages from Void Zero, including Vite. Like total npm downloads is just insane. It's just wild. So, and I think like it's also like it's good that it's not going like super fast, while other areas are easier to dog food and to improve, because like Vite already has a lot of, let's say, security mechanisms to not introduce accidental breaking changes, right? We have the ecosystem CI that tests all the framework tests with a new Vite version, for example. We have really like talented team members who are like giving really good input, also with different framework backgrounds, which is pretty amazing. But of course, there are more things that can be improved. Also, the whole story, like I read it so often. Oh yeah, if you need SEO, you shouldn't use Vite. You should use something else. Well, you can do that with Vite. You can have server-side rendering, and closing that gap so people can say, hey, I want to opt in for a full framework like Nuxt, amazing. Or I go like a Vue SPA with just Vite to have it very lightweight. And in the middle, there's nothing. That's not entirely correct. And same for like I know React and Next and so on and so on. Having this like middle gap closed would be really nice. So I think there are a couple of ways where this can improve. And of course, then there's that part, and yeah, I just mentioned roll down the bundler where a lot of things are happening. And then we can take a look at the layer, right? There are so many ways where and also so many open issues that can still be tackled for sure.
When you talked about the SSR in Vite without Nuxt or any other framework, I instantly thought about a project called Vic, which is basically just that. You don't need a full framework such as Nuxt to have SSR in Vite. The project is maintained by the author. I've seen it.
Like yes, I talked to him actually at a conference a couple months ago. The author of project, nice. Yeah.
Nice. Yes, the project is really interesting. The promise is really nice to have basically SSR without Vue, without React, just have it plain in Vite. So
I mean, you still integrate it with the frameworks, right? But I guess the idea is to say, hey, this is unopinionated SSR. You don't have to like opt into the opinions of framework, but just say like, hey, you can do whatever you want. We'll make it as accessible as possible. On the other hand, with Nitro v3, in a certain way, this goes the same direction. Like Nitro is shifting from what I would say like a more of a back then like a Express, Hono, and so on competitor to, hey, sure, I can do all of that too, but I want to be this like middle ground where you can adapt Nitro in a Vue code base and have server-side rendering just through that, and also don't need any opinions now that you can, I don't know, say I have a server entry file, or I don't need to use file system-based routing, which I didn't need to use before, but it's even easier now. So I think these like tiny parts, and then once again as Vite plugin, make things really digestible and unlock a true like composable architecture. Say, okay, I take this framework, I take this adapter if I need SSR, and I take another thing. And I think it's also good that both things exist, both Vike or Vike, however it's pronounced, and Nitro, to first of all like have different people with different approaches there, and to see how things are developing, and maybe they can benefit from both of them in the end.
I just when you said Vike or Vite or Vic, I just reminded myself about the time when Evan announced that he's working on Vite. It was I remember this post in X or in Twitter when he just shared that he was doing some experiment overnight, and he has really promising results out of it. Like he shared some glimpse of his benchmark, just showing the comparison with Webpack. And I remember the very first like releases or showcases of Vite, and it was so mind blowing that you can have so great like developer experience of almost instant HMR if you even combine it with your like IDE ability to autosave a file after a certain amount of time. It makes it even better because you have almost instant update on your website.
It's crazy. Like you can really put them side by side, just say like, on type basically save and it will update. And things are getting even better, right? Like for larger projects right now, the Vite dev server can be a bit slower because of its unbundled nature. But with roll down and the full bundle mode that is being worked on, we kind of want to go back to a fully bundled dev server again, but still super fast because, well, it is not only written in Rust, but also written with very, very much performance in mind. So that will be a big blessing for especially like this huge enterprise monorepos and enterprise projects.
Sounds great. So apart from those features that you mentioned that could be added to Vite at some point, do you have already in mind something, let's say, huge that could be part of Vite? Like something that could completely change how we write or develop web applications? Let me give you an example, such as the Webpack versus Vite. This is like groundbreaking change, and that it's not only in one framework, such as in Vue, but it's like throughout the whole ecosystem. Do you think something like this could be happening or possible, or do we reach a point where we basically add on top of something that is already great and there is no need for?
I'm not sure. Like I think in Vite itself, there like the biggest change will be Vite 8 by switching out the bundlers under the hood, right? To replace ES build and roll up with roll down and making sure that things which is still working out of the box, which is already mind blowing. And also all the plugins as well, with some caveats, but most of the plugins will either be already built in, so we don't need it, or will work. So I think this is a big change that applies to every framework, but it is not like something that is user facing, where the users ideally upgrades to like, okay, it works, it's just way faster, and that's the experience we're aiming for. In the end, I think, especially with AI on the rise, the question is how web development will look like from now on in, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. I know, like, I feel like we say this every time when something like crazy happens. I think like the question is what, like, first there was jQuery, right? Then we had SPA frameworks like React or Vue, and what will be the React or Vue compared to the current React or Vue? I think this is a big question, and I personally don't necessarily have an answer for that. Otherwise, well, probably work on that. No, I'm kidding. But I would be at least sharing my ideas with other people. There are some thoughts. People say, oh yeah, sync engines, for example, are exactly that. Possibly. I don't know. Effect, yes, super interesting, more for the backend than the front end, for scripts where I use it a lot. But yeah, and in the current light of how AI is evolving, I'm curious how it will go, because I don't know. I don't necessarily want to have a chatbot in every website that's AI powered. It should be more than that. But I also can't imagine just typing my prompt in the URL and just get a website tailored to me. We will see. This is a magic mystery to still open.
So as we are in the era of AI, I must ask about some things related to AI. So in terms of your, let's say, daily work, how do you see using AI? Does it make you more productive, or in terms of like your daily work as a developer, as a developer DevRel, does it make you more productive? How it helps you, or does it help you, or is it something that it's slowing you down and you just avoid it?
So it depends on how you use the AI, I would say, and what work you do. I think from a development perspective, I think if you were still in the like, oh yeah, tab autocomplete AI part, which I've been for quite a while, I think it helps me for a few things, but it doesn't make me crazy productive. But when switching to like a more agentic flow or like Claude Code and you name it, that's basically generating the code for you with like models that really got really good. This is like really improving the workflow for me. So for example, I built a couple internal things like a dashboard, And honestly, most of the code is actually written by AI. And now people might come like, yeah, but it's all slop. And I have to say, I thought so too, but surprisingly, it's not. It's probably also not because I also I I learned it to not write slop. I learned it to use the composition API the right way. I say, hey, refactor all the stuff into inline composables, which you should also do if you use Vue and don't use inline composables right now. Or so I need to have the knowledge about the framework and the structure and best practices, and then tell the AI, like coach the AI to do so. But after that, it could do very well. So I must say, if I would have done like the same work for some internal tools by AI versus like by hand or with like autocomplete, this would have taken me way longer, to be fair. So it definitely improves workflows, but this is for engineering work. I think for more, I don't want to say, well, it's partially creative work, I would say, like for writing, for example. As DevRel, I'm responsible for most of the social media posts that are on like the Void Zero accounts. And there, for example, I post at least 3 like posts a week, 2 about roll down, 1 about V-test. People might have noticed that. And there it's about like, okay, highlighting features that might be older, people don't know about, or maybe people, it's a new thing. It could be interesting. So there, I still prefer to like write it in my own voice, of course, but it can also help to say, I don't know, let's use AI and say, hey, go through the release notes and take a look at some features and tell me what you think could be interesting and why. So for like a bit of ideation, now I don't say like, okay, I just copy paste the first 10 things and I'm good. I still evaluate him on my own because obviously I know what I already wrote about, or what maybe gets an update soon. I just want to wait a bit, or maybe what might not be that relevant for people or for a certain target group, etc., etc. But it can already help process a lot of unstructured data, which is quite helpful. Same for things like, suggestions for phrasing sometimes. So I said I want to write things in my own voice, and it's still true. But sometimes, as English is not my native language, it's nice to say like, hey, give me 3 options to revert that. Here's what I wanna reach for, and that's definitely making me more productive and the result cleaner, while still keeping like my actual voice and tone. So from that perspective, we have this like creative and like more content work versus the development part. Yeah, and I'm curious where we'll go.
I completely agree on the topic of like English not being your native language. Even though I think both of us speak quite well, we still are not native. We still don't know every possible word, and we're not such fluent in this language. And this helps a lot. I can totally agree when I'm writing some articles or some documentation, or maybe for internal projects, I'm writing some specs, like technical specs. It helps a lot because we are not native. This is not our native language. So I completely agree on that. So now if we can move on to, let's say, open source and motivational topics, I would call it like that. So what motivates you to be in open source for that long time? Because it's not like 1 year, it's few years at least, if I'm not mistaken. So
That's
what
correct.
keeps you motivated to do all of that?
I think motivation also changed over time in a certain way. But so first of all, the people, obviously, like the people working together with, like they're just amazing. So big shout out to them. It's always great to learn from each other, to have healthy discussions, to solve problems together. So in a sense, it's also community part. Um, Definitely not the money. We established that before. Like not saying I'm starving and going broke right now. That's definitely not true. As I am also have the luxury of getting paid for open source now, at least partially. So for everything that's Void Zero related, and that's a blessing. And I know it's quite a privileged situation, and I'm very happy for that. So, but even before that, of course, like contributing to Nuxt is always done on my spare time, right? Of course, I also found a way to make that sustainable for myself by offering consultancy, to like offset that cost and also to pay the bills, and that worked quite well, I would say. Still doing that a tiny bit, but of course, given that I work at Void Zero full time now, I had to reduce that to a good amount. And the other side, I think like open source really improves your skills. Like I think if you work on a closed source project, maybe even a small team, it's really tricky because very often you get this like tunnel vision of, okay, I have my project, and you don't even know about like the latest tech and what's going on. Working in open source can really change that and keep you more in like what's going on. In a certain way, depending on what you're working, that also keeps you a bit away from reality, because most of the projects are a kind of legacy and most of the big enterprise projects have different problems. I was in a fortunate situation still am that I can see in all of these worlds through the different roles, right? For like consultancy, I see in big projects and I can dog food that back once again. And the other thing is, of course, giving back, right? Like in the end, I think a lot of projects and a lot of apps and a lot of money wouldn't be out there if it wouldn't be for open source. So I give that back with my time, with the content that I make as well, that is free available. And I mean, no shame for those who don't. There's still also an option to give money. So there's your chance to sponsor your favorite people in open source or organizations in open source. So that's always a good option, especially if it's not from your money, but your company's money. But that's a whole different conversation, because then people are like, hey, I got it for free. Why should I? Anyway, digressing. In the end, it's like quite a few things that keep me in open source and around. And as I said, I also like, there were some breaks, focus on other things. Also fine if you feel like, hey, look, I don't feel like, you don't want to get burned out, which also happens quite often in open source. So nobody is forcing you. I think that's another thing. You do that because you're intrinsically motivated. You're not doing that because you say like, oh, I don't know, I need to get like this checkbox in my CV or something. No, you're doing that because also it's fun, it's joy. And it's great to see what people build with the tools you're help building with as well. Like if I see, I don't know, a website and the little Vue dev tools show like a Nuxt icon, I'm like, yeah, it's pretty amazing. So that's also another thing that that definitely contributes to me contributing in that sense.
Agree, completely agree. So in terms of contributing to open source, to Nuxt, to Vite, what would be your advice for someone who haven't done it yet, but feels underneath that he would like to do it? What would you advise to them?
I would probably say the same if someone asked me like, oh yeah, I never gave a talk, like a technical talk, what should I talk about? Talk about something that you are using. So same, like contribute to something that you are using. Because if you say like, oh yeah, there's this cool project Vite, I never, like, of course I'm using it in a certain way, I have no idea and I'm not really interested in, it's difficult. It's easier to say like, hey, I have a library and there's a bug, and maybe I even patched it already because I need to like work that. So you have a like npm or like pnpm, whatever patch file for that already. Fork it and then create a pull request, or in a better manner, create an issue first. If it's well maintained, the maintainer will like point it out and so on, so on. So drive-by PRs are also a bit tricky. I still do them sometimes, but then usually as a more experienced contributor, I also know like, okay, here, this is a general way of fixing that, because of course, just because it works for your case, it doesn't necessarily mean it will work for yours. Also, their disclaimer still happens that it won't be accepted. So the rule is make an issue first, even say like, hey, here is how I patched it. Would that work as well? Or like, is there anything else? Maintainers are always happy about people, first of all, reporting bugs, and then even being willing to fix them as a contributor. That's great. Other than that, like I like the Boy Scout principle. If you read the docs, for example, you see a typo or you see, oh, there's something missing, and you read through that and then you finally understood it and it clicked. Someone else is probably also reading the same docs and having the same problem. So adding that, and it doesn't have to be perfect, once again, adding that there to say like, hey, I was looking for that. It's nowhere documented. Here it is. People will be very happy, because especially maintainers of projects, they know their things inside out very often. So they have this tunnel vision that other people might have with their projects as well. They have this like expertise built up. They don't necessarily can see the docs from the eyes of a newcomer easily. Some more, some less, right? So a fresh pair of eyes is always recommended. In the end, also don't go into the way that say like, oh, only code is contribution. No, doc PRs are contributions. Like giving talks about it is contribution. Writing content about it is also contribution in the end, because this is like how do things get adopted, because there is good content about it. And that's also one of the reasons why like I do the YouTube videos that I would love to have in the beginning when I started doing Nuxt, and there was not that much, which is more than fine because now there is a bit more. So there are tons of ways to figure out what you like to do. You also don't force yourself, and then I think if you go on that with good intention, not much can go wrong. And also that's important for expectation management. Don't be disappointed if your PR might not be merged or your issue might be closed. It could be very much the maintainer says, hey, here you say there's a cool feature, I want to bring that in. The maintainer says, no. They're fine. They are fine to do so. You can fork it. You can, if it's like a pluggable thing, right? For example, for Nuxt, not everything has to live in the core. Write a module, and if it gets adopted, then it might, like if it gets like super popular, it might be part of the core one day. This happened before, but there's also a reason why not everything is in the core, and everything you bring in as a feature, maintainers have to maintain, ideally until the next major week they could drop it, but probably longer because then people depend on it, and then it's tricky to make breaking changes. So I think these were my very short tips on contribution.
But just to top on that, if you are a maintainer and someone creates a PR or even an issue, don't respond with no dot.
Yeah, no, of course. A bit
Give
of
at
reason would
least
be
a
helpful.
bit more
Yeah.
context.
Yeah, I mean,
no,
for example,
because of X, Y, Z, and so on.
For example, I also reported an issue recently to the OXC repository where like, oh yeah, if you have an old version and this, that, then there's not a good error message. And then the answer was like, yeah, it's not worth fixing because updating like is something you should consider yourself, and that's fine. So it's also all right. Like people have a limited time as well. And last thing, especially nowadays, please, if you submit a PR to something, make sure it's not AI slop. Maintainers hate AI slop. And with AI slop, I mean, like, you look, disclose that you're using AI, it's more than fine, but also disclose how much you actually know about the code. Like if you say, okay, I guided AI to do what I wanted and it's passing all the tests, I actually edited the test as well and it's looking all good, that's perfectly fine. But not like, oh yeah, Claude Code fixed this problem and then just commit. And CI is failing and whatnot, or in Rust ways, not even compiling or similar. There are some very base levels, and I'll tell you, it is quite painful because it takes a lot of maintainers' time to respond to these issues, even if it's just an automated message saying this looks like AI slot closed. Yeah, if you want to contribute, this is not really the way. And as I said, it's not to say don't use AI, just make sure that you submit a PR so you are responsible for the code, no matter who generated or wrote it. No matter if it was your friend, no matter if it was me copy pasting it in the message and you put it in, I don't know, or if it was AI, you are responsible for that in the end. And yeah, make sure that's the case.
Completely agree. So now we'll be shortly moving to the closing phase of today's episode. So one question to you regarding Vite 0, because you shared with us
Vite 0? Void 0.
Void 0, sorry.
Vite 0 would be also good.
It's unpublished project, maybe, who knows? But
actually, fun fact, Void 0 was originally planned to be named Vite Labs, but I think Void 0 is way better. So my 2 cents on that.
I think as well. So for our listeners, our viewers, is there anything else you would like to share with about Vite or Void 0 that wasn't been shared yet, or we haven't shared yet?
I think we covered a lot. I think the key part is take a look. We got this new very fancy redesign. So if you want to see beautiful websites, feel free to take a look there. Both the agency and Simon, who implemented the whole design, did an amazing job there. So yeah, take a look and see some very nice animations. But I think the main part is if you're using any of the tooling on the Void 0 stack, no matter if it's like Oxland, Oxform, and Vite, like let us know if there are any issues. Feel free to raise them, to contribute in that way, join the discords to keep in touch. If you just use Vite and have not heard of anything I just mentioned, take a look. Once again, there are the websites. And well, other than that, if you use something like ESLint or Prettier, try upgrading because it should be pretty easy. I've seen a couple of migrations and also like quite some open source migrations. So take a look there for not only faster build time, linting, formatting, but also just better rules here and there as well. So I think that's that. And stay tuned for V+.
Sounds great. So final question to you, Alex. Where can viewers, listeners find you?
Yeah. Well, as we said before, right, all across the web or the next conference. I am on Blue Sky, on X, on YouTube at the Alex Lichter, has also in the video and probably linked below. Other than that, I have a website. I always say I don't maintain it. It's kind of true. It's still Nuxt 3, I think, actually. So I should update that at some point. But yeah, I think socials are the easiest. And yeah, social and YouTube. I also wanted to stream again, but I don't have time at the moment to do that. But yeah, these are the best bets. Otherwise, in your GitHub issues, if you report something.
Okay, great. So that will be it for our today episode. Thank you, Alex, very much for joining and sharing with us a bit about your life as a developer advocate at developer relation
All the
specialist
same.
engineer devrel let's say
All the same.
devrel at Void Zero, about Vite, about Vite Plus, about open source. It was a really, really interesting discussion, so thanks once again, and yeah, see you next time.
Thanks for having me. Bye.